establish for the purpose of communication with manufacturers will include large amounts of discoverable data. So any questions that we answer is available to the public through a Freedom of Information Act request. And so the whole process of creating this database is a process of building evidence for lawsuits, which creates huge problems for businesses. The crisis of the day caused by the potential design of this database with open access to data will not only create disruptions in businesses where you must divert your attention to addressing these issues as the #1 top priority of the day regardless of what it is, but it will equally present a risk of subversion of purpose and inundation with your agency by getting zillions of product incidents pouring into your agency with the immediacy of the internet. I find it hard to imagine that the agency will be able to retain its focus. The document defining your implementation plan indicates that, at least as I read it, I could be mistaken, is that the CPSC intends to verify that the person presenting the report is who they say they are, and will likewise dig deeper into the so-called most serious incidents, which I take to be a concession that the CPSC anticipates it will not be able to keep up with the inundation of filings. That suggests that the data that will go up in the database will be largely unverified and therefore present the threat that I'm concerned about. In response to these types of concerns in Canada, where they are considering a similar database, they have decided that their database will be entirely confidential, which I think is an interesting possibility, although in the way our statute is constructed, it would have to be defined a little bit differently. I'd like to say also one last thing, and I'm going to get to my recommendations. I'm concerned about the security of the data in the database. I understand that the plan involves significant investments in making data secure, particularly in the private side of the database, where one manufacturer can't see another manufacturer and the public can't see the dialogue with the agency. But being a regular reader of newspapers, I'm a little bit skeptical about the agency's ability to truly do that. There are a lot of hackers out there, and the disclosure of this data publicly could create a tremendous harm for businesses. All of these harms that I'm articulating are essentially costs, and all those costs will have to be borne by businesses. Small businesses with their lack of capital are the most vulnerable. The feeding frenzy that can result from public disclosure of data has been well documented. If you look, for instance, at what happened to Mattel with its notorious recalls in '07, they paid a settlement in California on Proposition 65. They paid a settlement with the state of Arizona and 38 other states on the same claims. They paid a fine of $2.3 million to the CPSC. They incurred tens of millions of dollars in costs to recall the products. To my knowledge, there were no reported injuries from these recalls. And then, because that apparently was not enough, there was a class action lawsuit settlement in the tens of millions of dollars on top of it. So the disclosure of incidents, perhaps that don't result in any actual injuries, can result in a litigation liability feeding frenzy that can crush companies. We, for instance, do not have the financial resources of Mattel and could not withstand that type of assault. That would have been the end for us. My recommendations are that, first of all, that the agency interpret the provisions of this portion of the CPSI very conservatively to ensure that only validated incidents go up. I believe that the safest way to do this, particularly in the beginning, is to focus the data on recalls. Those are incidents that have been filtered through the agency and have been thoroughly investigated by the agency and validated. Of course, I know that there is the implication that 15B disclosures, 15B reports may, under some circumstances, go up. That's another thing that needs to be very carefully considered by the agency as, for instance, a do not sell order that is a corrective action under 15B could, if publicized through this database, be taken tantamount to a recall. So 15B disclosures and the consequences of 15B disclosures can result in harm just by providing publicity. A do not sell order is an inherently private agreement between the CPSC and a manufacturer. I also would clarify that in my view, reading the statute does not require that every incident and every 15B report that is provided to you be publicized. So I believe that you have the ability to interpret the Act to be more narrow.
Mr. Waldenberg, your time is up. Can you just make your closing remarks, please?
Yes. That's pretty much the end.
No, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
Okay,
I'm
okay, thank you.
I'm going to say one more thing. Manufacturers have an obligation to file under this provision, and inherently judgment needs to be made in deciding which incidents are filed and which are not. I would recommend that the agency rely on the good judgment of businesses when they make those decisions in fuzzy areas, so that manufacturers can make those decisions with confidence and not worry about second guessing.
Okay, thank you for your very thorough remarks. I have a few questions, and I'm sure my colleagues do too, but this one is for you, Mr. Silverman. Given the 10-day publishing requirement, do you think that the statutory language in the CPSI